Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, delivered a film that would become a landmark of cinematic artistry, Vertigo. Released in 1958, this psychological thriller, starring James Stewart and Kim Novak, was intended to be a triumphant return to form for the legendary director. However, upon its initial release, Vertigo did not achieve the critical or commercial success one might expect from a Hitchcock masterpiece. Instead, it was met with a lukewarm reception, a stark contrast to the roaring applause his previous works often garnered. This perplexing underperformance has long been a subject of debate and intrigue within film circles. Why did a film now considered by many to be Hitchcock's finest, and indeed one of the greatest films ever made, falter so spectacularly at the box office and with critics in its time? This documentary delves into the dark reasons behind Vertigo's initial flop, exploring the production challenges, the controversial themes, and the prevailing cultural climate that may have contributed to its unappreciated status. We will uncover the hidden narratives and overlooked elements that made Vertigo a misunderstood gem. The year 1958 marked the release of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, a film that would, over time, ascend to the pantheon of cinematic greats. Yet, its initial reception was far from the adulation that typically followed the master of suspense. To understand this perplexing paradox, one must first consider the landscape of Hollywood and American society in the late 1950s. This was an era grappling with evolving social norms, a burgeoning understanding of psychology, and a pervasive sense of post-war unease. Alfred Hitchcock, by 1958, was an established titan of filmmaking. His name alone was a guarantee of suspense, intrigue, and often, box office success. Films like Psycho, The 39 Steps, and North by Northwest had cemented his reputation. Vertigo, however, was a more personal and arguably more complex project for the director. It was based on the novel The Living Room by Pierre Boileau and Thomas Narcejac, authors known for their dark, psychological narratives. Hitchcock, ever the innovator, saw potential in adapting their story, which dealt with themes of obsession, manipulation, and the blurred lines between reality and illusion. The film's genesis involved a collaboration with Paramount Pictures, a studio that had a long-standing relationship with Hitchcock. The screenplay was developed by Samuel A. Taylor, with contributions from Hitchcock himself and Maxwell Anderson. The casting was also crucial. James Stewart, a frequent Hitchcock collaborator and a beloved star, was chosen to play John Scotty Ferguson, a former detective suffering from acrophobia and a debilitating fear of heights. Stewart's everyman persona made him particularly adept at portraying characters wrestling with inner turmoil, a quality essential for Scotty's descent into obsession. The role of Madeline Elster, the enigmatic woman who captivates Scotty, fell to Kim Novak. Novak was a rising star at Columbia Pictures, known for her captivating beauty and a certain vulnerability that made her a compelling choice. Her casting, however, was not without its complexities. Hitchcock had initially envisioned Vera Miles for the role, but Miles became unavailable due to pregnancy. This led to Novak being loaned out from Columbia, a common practice in Hollywood, but one that also added a layer of studio politics to the production. The narrative of Vertigo centers on Scotty's investigation into the supposed suicidal tendencies of Madeline, hired by her wealthy husband, Gavin Elster, played by Tom Helmore. As Scotty becomes increasingly entangled with Madeline, his own psychological state deteriorates. The film delves deeply into themes that were perhaps ahead of their time for mainstream American cinema. Obsession, the psychological impact of trauma, and the manipulation of identity were explored with a frankness that some audiences and critics found unsettling. Furthermore, the film's preoccupation with obsession and the creation of an idealized woman, a doll-like figure brought to life, touched upon sensitive societal anxieties regarding female agency and male desire. In the late 1950s, the Hays Code, though weakening, still exerted considerable influence on film content, discouraging overt explorations of taboo subjects. While Vertigo did not explicitly violate the code, its psychological intensity and morally ambiguous characters pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for mass consumption. The production itself was not without its challenges. Hitchcock famously pushed the boundaries of cinematic technique, employing innovative camera work, including the pioneering dolly zoom effect, to visually represent Scotty's vertigo. This technical ambition, while artistically groundbreaking, added to the film's cost and complexity. The demanding shooting schedule and the often intense performances required from Stewart and Novak further contributed to the film's arduous journey to the screen. The historical context of the Cold War and the pervasive fear of nuclear annihilation also subtly influenced the cultural mood. While not a direct theme in Vertigo, this underlying societal anxiety may have contributed to a general discomfort with films that delve too deeply into psychological darkness and the fragility of the human psyche. Audiences, perhaps seeking escapism, may have found Vertigo's intensely introspective and unsettling narrative to be too much to bear. Therefore, when Vertigo premiered, it entered a cultural conversation that was not entirely ready for its nuanced exploration of obsession, delusion, and the dark undercurrents of the human mind. Alfred Hitchcock's 1958 masterpiece, Vertigo, is a film now celebrated for its psychological depth and groundbreaking cinematic techniques. However, its initial reception upon release was far from triumphant. The movie was a commercial disappointment, failing to capture the public's imagination or achieve the box office success expected of a Hitchcock production. Several interwoven factors contributed to this lukewarm reception, painting a picture of a film that was perhaps too complex, too dark, and too far ahead of its time for the prevailing sensibilities of late 1950s America. The story's genesis lay in a French novel, D'entre les morts, From Among the Dead, by Boileau-Narsage. Hitchcock acquired the rights, intending to craft a suspenseful tale that would delve into the darker aspects of human psychology. He envisioned a narrative that would explore obsession, manipulation, and the blurred lines between reality and delusion. The screenplay, developed over time, focused on John "Scotty" Ferguson, a former detective suffering from acrophobia, a debilitating fear of heights, which ultimately led to his retirement from the force. This phobia, a central element of the film's title and narrative, immediately set Scotty apart as a protagonist grappling with profound internal conflict. James Stewart was the natural choice to embody Scotty. His established persona as the everyman, capable of portraying vulnerability and moral conviction, made him particularly adept at portraying characters wrestling with inner turmoil, a quality essential for Scotty's descent into obsession. Stewart's ability to convey subtle psychological shifts was crucial in making Scotty's unraveling believable, even as the plot became increasingly convoluted. The role of Madeline Elster, the enigmatic woman who captivates Scotty, fell to Kim Novak. Novak was a rising star at Columbia Pictures, known for her captivating beauty and a certain vulnerability that made her a compelling choice. Her casting, however, was not without its complexities. Hitchcock had initially envisioned Vera Miles for the role, but Miles became unavailable due to pregnancy. This setback led to Novak being loaned out from Columbia, a common practice in Hollywood at the time, but one that also added a layer of studio politics to the production. Novak's performance would become central to the film's exploration of illusion and identity, as she was tasked with portraying not just Madeline, but also Judy Barton, the woman who would later embody Madeline. The narrative of Vertigo centers on Scotty's investigation into the supposed suicidal tendencies of Madeline, hired by her wealthy husband, Gavin Elster, played by Tom Helmore. As Scotty becomes increasingly entangled with Madeline, his own psychological state deteriorates. He is drawn into her mysterious world, tasked with following her, observing her unusual behavior, and preventing her from jumping into the San Francisco Bay. The film masterfully builds an atmosphere of unease and romantic fascination. Scotty's growing obsession with Madeline, fueled by her ethereal beauty and tragic aura, becomes the driving force of the plot. He falls deeply in love with this phantom-like figure, a love that is both consuming and ultimately destructive. The film delves deeply into themes that were perhaps ahead of their time for mainstream American cinema. Obsession, the psychological impact of trauma, and the manipulation of identity were explored with a frankness that some audiences and critics found unsettling. The idea of a man becoming so fixated on a woman that he attempts to recreate her, even after her supposed death, was a potent and disturbing concept. This exploration of a man's desperate attempt to control and possess a woman, turning her into a projection of his own desires, touched upon anxieties about male dominance and female agency. Furthermore, the film's preoccupation with obsession and the creation of an idealized woman, a doll-like figure brought to life, touched upon sensitive societal anxieties regarding female agency and male desire. In the late 1950s, the Hays Code, though weakening, still exerted considerable influence on film content, discouraging overt explorations of taboo subjects. While Vertigo did not explicitly violate the code, its psychological intensity and morally ambiguous characters pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for mass consumption. The film's exploration of psychological manipulation and the blurring of truth and falsehood was subtle but profound, pushing the audience to question the nature of reality and the motives of the characters. The production itself was not without its challenges. Hitchcock famously pushed the boundaries of cinematic technique, employing innovative camera work, including the pioneering dolly zoom effect, to visually represent Scotty's vertigo. This effect, often referred to as the vertigo effect, involved simultaneously zooming in and dollying out, or vice versa, creating a disorienting visual distortion that perfectly mirrored Scotty's internal experience. This technical ambition, while artistically groundbreaking and now an iconic cinematic tool, added to the film's cost and complexity. The demanding shooting schedule and the often intense performances required from Stewart and Novak further contributed to the film's arduous journey to the screen. The meticulous attention to detail, from the costumes to the set design, was characteristic of Hitchcock's directorial style, but it also meant a lengthy and expensive production process. The historical context of the Cold War and the pervasive fear of nuclear annihilation also subtly influenced the cultural mood. While not a direct theme in Vertigo, this underlying societal anxiety may have contributed to a general discomfort with films that delve too deeply into psychological darkness and the fragility of the human psyche. Audiences, perhaps seeking escapism from the anxieties of the era, may have found Vertigo's intensely introspective and unsettling narrative to be too much to bear. The film's somber tone, its exploration of deep-seated psychological issues, and its lack of a clear-cut, triumphant resolution may have left audiences feeling unsettled rather than entertained. Upon its release in 1958, Vertigo garnered mixed reviews. While some critics praised Hitchcock's directorial skill and the film's innovative cinematography, others found the plot convoluted and the characters unsympathetic. The lengthy runtime and the perceived lack of traditional suspense elements, compared to Hitchcock's previous successes like Psycho or North by Northwest, also contributed to its underperformance. Audiences accustomed to more straightforward thrillers perhaps struggled with the film's deliberate pacing and its profound psychological underpinnings. The central twist, revealing that Madeline was an elaborate fabrication and that the woman Scotty fell in love with was actually Judy Barton, a woman hired to play the part, was shocking, but the journey to that revelation was, for many, a disorienting and emotionally taxing experience. The film's critical and commercial failure meant that it quickly faded from public consciousness, a rarity for a Hitchcock film. It was not until decades later, particularly with the advent of home video and a re-evaluation of cinema history, that Vertigo began to be recognized for its true artistic merit. Critics and scholars revisited the film, appreciating its complex themes, its psychological realism, and Stewart's nuanced performance. The film's visual language, its exploration of obsession, and its dark portrayal of human desire were re-examined, revealing a depth that had been overlooked in its initial release. The initial failure of Vertigo serves as a stark reminder that artistic innovation and psychological depth do not always translate into immediate commercial success, and that sometimes, a film's true brilliance is only recognized with the passage of time and a shift in cultural perspective. The initial reception of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo in 1958 stands as a stark enigma in cinematic history, a film now celebrated as a masterpiece yet initially dismissed by both critics and audiences. This paradox begs the question, why did such a technically ambitious and psychologically profound work falter so spectacularly upon its release? The implications of this failure are multifaceted, touching upon the very nature of artistic innovation, audience expectations, and the elusive alchemy of cinematic success. One significant factor contributing to Vertigo's underperformance was its sheer departure from the established Hitchcockian formula. Audiences and critics alike had come to expect from the master of suspense a more immediate, visceral thrill, characterized by clear-cut villains, escalating tension, and often a triumphant resolution. Vertigo, however, delved into a far more ambiguous and unsettling territory. Its deliberate pacing, its focus on the internal turmoil of its protagonist, John Scotty Ferguson, and its exploration of obsession, guilt, and the fragile nature of identity, presented a narrative that was less about external threat and more about the labyrinthine depths of the human psyche. This introspective quality, while now lauded for its complexity, proved challenging for viewers accustomed to more straightforward genre fare. The intricate plot, with its layers of deception and psychological manipulation, may have been perceived as convoluted rather than cunning, leaving many feeling disoriented rather than enthralled. Furthermore, the film's groundbreaking visual techniques, particularly the dolly zoom or vertigo effect, while revolutionary, were also costly and demanding to execute. This technical ambition, though now iconic, contributed to an extended and expensive production. Such an investment, coupled with the film's subsequent lack of commercial traction, represented a significant financial disappointment for Paramount Pictures, amplifying the perception of its failure. The meticulous attention to detail, a hallmark of Hitchcock's directorial prowess, while artistically commendable, also prolonged the filmmaking process, adding to the overall cost. The cultural climate of the late 1950s also played a subtle yet significant role. The Cold War era was steeped in anxiety, and while Vertigo's themes of psychological fragility and existential dread were not overtly political, the film's descent into darkness may have been too much for an audience seeking escapism. The unsettling nature of Scotty's obsession, his inability to distinguish reality from illusion, and the tragic trajectory of his pursuit, offered little comfort or catharsis. Instead, it mirrored a societal unease, a sense of underlying instability that audiences might have preferred to avoid in their cinematic entertainment. The controversy surrounding the film's critical and commercial reception lies in this very disconnect. Was Vertigo simply ahead of its time, its complex psychological narrative and innovative filmmaking too advanced for the prevailing tastes of 1958? Or did its perceived narrative flaws and pacing issues genuinely alienate audiences, regardless of its artistic merit? The subsequent re-evaluation of Vertigo, culminating in its eventual recognition as one of the greatest films ever made, suggests that the initial dismissal was less an indictment of the film's quality and more a reflection of the shifting sands of public perception and critical appreciation. The enduring legacy of Vertigo demonstrates that true artistic significance can transcend immediate commercial success, often requiring the passage of time and a broader cultural understanding to be fully appreciated. Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, released in 1958, is now widely considered a cinematic masterpiece, yet its initial reception was far from triumphant. The film's deliberate pacing, its deep dive into the protagonist's psychological complexities, and its exploration of obsession and deception presented a narrative that diverged significantly from the more conventional thrillers of its era. This introspective quality, coupled with a convoluted plot that may have confused rather than captivated audiences, contributed to its lukewarm commercial performance and a critical cool reception. The innovative, yet costly, visual techniques, such as the famous dolly zoom, further escalated production expenses without an immediate return on investment. Furthermore, the cultural anxieties of the late 1950s, a period marked by the Cold War, may have made audiences less receptive to Vertigo's descent into psychological darkness and existential dread. Many viewers likely sought escapism rather than a mirror to societal unease. The film offered little in the way of catharsis, presenting instead an unsettling portrayal of obsession and the blurred lines between reality and illusion. This disconnect between the film's artistic ambitions and the prevailing audience expectations created a situation where its narrative depth was perceived as a flaw rather than a strength. The primary unresolved question surrounding Vertigo's initial failure lies in whether it was simply ahead of its time, its sophisticated psychological themes and groundbreaking techniques too nuanced for the tastes of 1958. The subsequent decades have witnessed a profound re-evaluation, elevating Vertigo to its current esteemed status. This journey from commercial disappointment to critical acclaim underscores the enduring power of visionary filmmaking to transcend immediate trends, proving that true artistic impact can indeed be a matter of time and evolving perception.